Hello, this is Tiambe Lockhart, and you are listening to Off to the Land of Milk and Honey podcast. This is a podcast that is a thrival guide for Indigenous women. Indigenous women meaning Black women who are Indigenous to this whole world, Native American women, Latina, and Asian women that identify with their pre-colonial Indigenous heritage and traditions and ancestors, and others. Anyone can listen to this podcast, but due to the deficit of representation and joy and feelings of freedom, this is dedicated specifically for us. And I haven't been on here in a while. I've been working on some creative projects, and my son has been on summer break. Shout out to all of the parents that are thugging it out for summer break. um, and also I was having some technical difficulties with my laptop and my phone. And so now that's all better. So now I'm back and happy to be back, happy to be sharing this information, especially at this time with everything going on. And today we will be discussing Heka. And Heka is the power of your words, the power of your words. And this is in relation to Hod Splendor, which is the eighth sephira of the Kabbalah. And it is also related to Sebek, which is the eighth sphere of the Kemetic tree of life. And today we will be discussing Heka and how the power of words shows up in ancient texts and in our history, as well as colonization's weapon of choice of communication and words, and ways that we can strengthen our own Heka and also use it positively. And also, due to everything that's going on right now with Nolan Wells, resting power, sending love to his mother and his family and friends, and the lynchings, I want to, at the end, not only use tools or give tools that we can use to improve our Heka, but just as protection in general. I started this podcast because I really believe that we can empower ourselves through our spirituality, and we can empower ourselves through doing our shadow work, which means really looking at ourselves and taking accountability for our lives, as well as mastering our minds. And we master our minds through reframing and through our perspectives. I sincerely believe that this country and white supremacy and colonization runs off of Black women's tears and runs off of us being in despair and being angry and feeling helpless. And that in turn creates internalization with disease and illness in our bodies and in our homes, which ripples down to our children. So I don't really believe in crying to the system or screaming at the system. I believe in changing it through spirituality and individually changing that and making that change. And that ripples to our communities, and that ripples to our children, and that ripples to our friends and our families. Us doing this work, us doing this shadow work, us mastering our minds, us doing our spiritual work and using our tools, especially as Black women, spirituality is our domain. I think that that's how we're going to make these changes so that we can have a better world in the future for everyone. And so that's why I started this podcast. And I definitely don't want to seem as if I'm putting myself on a high horse and that I know everything, because I'm going to forever be learning. And I hope that there are actually times where I am wrong and I'm like, whoa, I actually enjoy when my mind is blown and I think something is one way and it's another way. So I definitely don't want to come across as condescending, but I do believe that I've experienced a lot and I've gone through a very long self-initiation, starting with giving birth to my child. Well, starting in the beginning of my life, shit. But giving birth to my child, 9 pounds, 5 ounces, at the beginning of quarantine where everybody was scared of everything, the air, wiping everything down, and doing that at home, and then having to go to the hospital because my placenta wouldn't pass and I lost all this blood and fluid and all the things, and then being left alone 2 days later, not getting a hug for 3 months, not having anyone physically around to support me. Um, and God bless my midwife. She tried her best, but there was really only so much that she could do personally because she had babies to deliver and the pandemic and crisis. And so she had to keep everyone safe. So there was limited amount that she could, how she could support me physically. And she did a great job. Rasha, I love you forever. But because I didn't have a lot of physical support and everything that I went through, I had to heavily rely on my spirituality. And I had to heavily rely on my practices and just strengthening them and redefining my relationship with the divine and feeling the divine for the first time has been a great mother. And really listening to a lot of lectures by Bobby Hemmett and Phil Valentine and Brother Panic, Rest in Power, and so many others, these great master teachers, and just really studying and reading and practicing and receiving downloads and all of that. And so I just kind of think that it's selfish of me to just hold information and just keep it for myself, you know? So I wanted to make a podcast that I can give information that I've learned, wisdom that I've learned and I've acquired. And honestly, we're all learning different things. We're all here to master different things in every lifetime, and we're all at different levels and at different stages of our evolution. And not saying that anybody's better than anybody, but we're all learning different things. So, just take what you want from this and we're going to keep it moving. Okay. So Heka, let's go through some ancient understandings of Heka and the power of our words. Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, there was morning, the first day. So I love this scripture, because I think when he's talking about the waters, we're talking about the waters and it was dark. I personally interpret that as the primordial mothers, personally. But anyways, that's a whole other episode. But when God said, let there be light, then light appeared, and he did it through words, or she did it through words. And for those who don't really believe in the Bible, you don't have to believe in the Bible, but we're just going through different texts of how Heka has been prominent. And then with Isis, Aset. So with Aset, who is also Isis, her Greek name is Isis. And the first Greeks were black. But with Aset tricked Ra into telling her his secret name telepathically and then becoming the most powerful sorceress. In history, slave women in the Atlantic slave trade and other slave trades who held magic in their words could destroy slave masters and their plantations with their tongues. And so their tongues were bound. In white supremacy, communication has been the weapon of choice. It's my understanding that most colonizers, when they came over, they didn't just start shooting. Some of them probably did, but they didn't just start shooting. They made friends with the indigenous people. And after a while, they convinced these indigenous people that there was something wrong with them through communication. They basically essentially divided them from God, separated them from God, fragmented them from God. And we see this a lot with colonization and with white supremacy. It's a fragmentation that happens, a fragmentation of information, a fragmentation, fragmenting people from themselves. And you can't help but think, is that set, you know, with with Osiris is that some people say Set is humanity, Set is the ego, and our whole purpose is to bring ourselves back together and become whole again. It's the whole purpose of Earth. But anyways, so with colonization and with pilgrims coming to indigenous spaces, they brought with them this disease of guilt and shame and separation and fragmentation through communication. They convinced people that there needed to be a middleman. And I'm not talking about shamans. I'm not talking about priests in the sense of spirituality or indigenous priests or priestesses, which means that people have certain gifts, and medicine men and women, they have special gifts of communicating with the divine. But I'm talking about a severe separation from God, and God is within, God is everywhere. When Black men were lynched, a lot of the times it started with a rumor. It started with gossip about him looking at a white woman, or a white woman accused a Black man of rape. When we're talking about all of these many, 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 not just Black Wall Street, but many, many, many Black towns in America that were abundant, that were sovereign, that were booming. People were killed, they were burned down, all of that due to envy and greed and this need to dominate melanated people, to control melanated people, this jealousy, this envy. It usually started with some sort of rumor about somebody did something that they didn't really do. Right? Communication. This is how the abuse of words, the abuse of communication. And also how I've seen white supremacy show up in the present day. And I say that specifically because I think when it's lynchings, Black men are being killed, or there is racist police brutality, these are things that we obviously know are racist. But there's a lot of microaggressions that exist. And that's why I'm specifically pointing this out and pointing out how words and communication is the weapon of choice for white supremacy. So, another example is when a lot of people were becoming, involved in pro-Palestine on the internet, on Instagram. I remember there were a lot of white women who were very pro-Palestine and who are very pro-Palestine. Great. But I remember it just taking the wrong turn, and me seeing white women attacking Black women for not saying anything about Palestine. And I'm thinking, and I feel like I said it to a couple of them, like, you know, that Black people in America are experiencing genocide and have been experiencing genocide in this country. And I just found it very interesting that subconsciously, what is this saying? It's saying genocides out of this country, all the way over here, we care about the genocides that are happening here that maybe our ancestors partook in, but we definitely are benefiting from. And a lot of them lived in gentrified neighborhoods. They benefit from the genocide. They benefit from gentrification. They benefit from systematic racism. And so I just found that very interesting. And I just was like, wow, this is white supremacy. And this is what you call cognitive dissonance, where you are completely detached from reality. You're saying one thing and you're doing another thing. You care about this genocide, but you don't care about this other genocide, you know? And I think that that's how it works now. This subconscious communication, this direct communication that you don't really care. I'm not hearing Black women in hospitals when they're trying to give birth, which results in deaths of Black women and their children. It's all through communication. It's all through communication. And I'd like to also talk about reframing and not receiving projections and reframing. So I had another instance. This was a while ago. It was when Mars was in retrograde in Gemini. And my son had not yet started preschool yet. And we'd walked to the grocery store. It was like a Monday, late morning. We walked to the grocery store and we were walking back. He was still in a stroller, but it was like one of those carrier, like kind of those push cart things. So it was pretty chunky. And we were walking back and there was this man who was out of it. He was in front of us, like standing still, and he was out of it, maybe drooling a little bit. And his eyes were closed. And I was like, "Ew, I probably should cross the street." But I was like, this thing is so chunky and big. Like, I do not feel like crossing the street and getting off the curb and getting it back on the curb. And I was like, fuck it. I used to live in New York. I'll be okay. So we walk past him and we walk to the curb. And I look behind us. And this man is running towards us, drooling, screaming, nigger, da, 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 blah, blah, like a maniac. Obviously had some sort of entity attachment, obviously on drug. Like it was just crazy. And I'm like, what the heck? And I just remember him screaming at us. And so I'm like, okay, you want to go there? I can go there with you. So I started screaming back at him and it wasn't working. It was like almost like feeding him. And I was like, ah. So then I remember I watched this Dr. Alim El-Bey lecture and he talked about the ancient understanding of the word nigga for like 10, 15 minutes. He went through so many ancient understandings of it. And so I'm just going to read just a couple, right? So I'm having, as this man is like spewing all of this hate and all of this nonsense, like I'm going back to 2 weeks ago about the understanding of the word. So there's Naga, Naya, Nanya, and he talks about how it means serpent. And the Kemetic definition of serpent is the god who dances in the shadow. The Dogon definition of the serpent is the seventh ancestor that turns into a serpent. The understanding that you are the seventh ancestor on your mother and father's side. You are the transforming serpent. You are the Christ now. And then he talks about the symbol of Christ at one time was the serpent. And when Christ went into the wilderness, he was there for 40 days and 40 nights, mastering the foundation of life, which is the elementals, fire, air, water, and earth. And when combined, it makes ether, which is Kundalini, serpentine force, which produces everything in the universe that we all touch, taste, smell, and hear. And I just want to clarify. So they say that in your DNA, it goes back 7 generations on your father's side and 7 generations on your mother's side. Again, a reference to Osiris as well. And that's a whole other thing. But, and then he also talked about the Chinese pyramids were built by the Nagas, and guru, the word guru stems from Naguru. And he also talks about, he goes on about this, but he also talks about the undifferentiated energy matter to give a raise to the ninth manifestation. The ninth manifestation is known as the mother of all things, Kundalini energy. And we're going to talk about Sekhmet, who is Kundalini energy as well. And Sekhmet sometimes is translated to Tefnut, and that's a whole thing within itself. But this is what I'm thinking of. I'm just thinking of power. I'm thinking of Kundalini when this man, so I switch. And at first I'm like, taking offense to what he's saying, and I'm getting rah-rah with him and defending myself and all this shit. And then I remember this. So I just switched it on him and my voice got real calm. And I was like, I'm taking my power back. Thank you. I'm taking my power back, filtering with the white light. Yep. I'm taking my power back, filtering with the white light. And I just kept saying that over and over again. And even though he was in this trance of whatever he was on, whatever was possessing him, I remember it was kind of like this shield between him and I. And then I just called in Anubis and literally, and we're going to talk about Anubis too for protection, but literally 5 seconds later, this woman and her dog came up, and I believe the dog was black, and came up with her dog. And then this huge Mexican dude came out of the store that we were standing in front of and was screaming at this man. God bless both of them. But he was like, this is a mother. Cause I had my son with me. Like, this is a mother. You get the fuck away from her. Blah, 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 blah. And he did. But when it was all over, I felt exhilarating. I took my power back from this person. And so that's my own like little interesting, maybe it's not interesting, but story about that. But that goes back to where I was watching this lecture with A.A. Rashid, and he speaks on how when you call somebody's name, communicate someone's name, Yahweh, I think was his example, they are then sitting on your throne, wearing your crown in your temple. And I'll never forget that, because when you are arguing or reacting to ridiculous projections, even though you might be rejecting that projection, you are allowing that person to sit on your throne wearing your crown in your temple. You are giving that person your power. And that's the same way that I feel with America. It's a narcissist. You don't sit there and argue with a narcissist, because everything you say is going to be used against you. They want that fuel, whether you're agreeing with them, whether you're yelling at them, whether you're cursing them out. They like that. Reactive abuse, they love that stuff. But when I reframed it and took back my power and sat back on my throne wearing my crown in my temple, and I said what the fuck it was, and I called in my protection, and I wasn't trying to go head to head with them, then that's when everything shifted. I'm a big fan of reframing. I think that it's important to really say to your subconscious and to teach yourself that everything that's happening is for your greatest good. Even that situation, yeah, it was scary. And yeah, coulda, woulda, shoulda, coulda went this way, coulda went that way, but it didn't, you know? And I felt in that moment, I took my power back. And really quickly, before we move on, there is a phrase when an entity possesses a group of people, like a lynch mob, like Nazis, like mean girls. It's called egregore. Okay. So that is a real thing where people together can become possessed by an entity, a community of people. That's how, like I said, that's how we have lynch mobs, where it's like, what the hell happened? Why everybody just went and burned the whole damn town? It's just a possession of an entity, which I think a lot of white supremacists have, some sort of possession of that. So let's talk about positive attributes, how we can use Heka positively. We can use Heka, our words, communication, for affirmation. Going back to the other sephira, which was Aset, the ninth sephira, and in Ma'at, 11 Laws of God, Ra'u Nefar, he speaks of being in a receptive state to say your affirmations. And how we get into a receptive state is we listen to different sound frequencies, theta, and our affirmations can penetrate deeper. I also like to say affirmations in the mornings before I look at my phone, or affirmations before we leave our house. I like to tap. Me and my son taps. We look in the mirror and we say our affirmations with butterfly tapping. Tapping is great, especially if you experience anxiety. You don't even have to be in the mirror. You don't have to necessarily even say any affirmations, but I really love doing that. And even saying your affirmations in the mirror. We talked about mirror work last time. I also like to say affirmations throughout my house, just affirming that my house is full of joy, full of love, unconditional love, full of protection, full of safety, full of abundance, all of that. One thing that I like to do with my child, you can talk to someone else, or you can talk to their teddy bear or one of their toys, and you can tell the teddy bear or someone else how amazing your child is with this. Talk to their teddy bear and just be like, oh my goodness, King did such an amazing job at school today. He was so great with his writing and his math. You should have seen it. Oh my gosh, it was so amazing. And their little faces just light up. It's so cute. And another thing that I will do, if my son is doing something, let's say that he's getting frustrated with something, I will tell him he's so patient. I will be like, "You're such a patient boy. I know that you're frustrated right now." I affirm it, but I'm like, but you are really great at being patient. A little brainwashing while you affirm how they feel as well. And then with strengthening our Heka, one of the four agreements is be impeccable with your words. So just being impeccable, having integrity with your words, not lying, not agreeing to shit that you don't really agree to. I'll just be like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. And so when you do speak your truth, when you do speak up, your words are powerful. But if you're constantly wasting your words, if you're constantly leaking your energy, because that's really what it is, if you're telling this person this and telling that person this and talking, you're leaking your energy. You know what I mean? Your life force energy. And that's why too, like if I don't really fuck with somebody, I'm not really trying to talk to them. I don't understand people who don't like people and then still want to talk to them and be up in their faces and know what they got going on. I don't want to talk to you. I honestly have a whole theory, and I'll just break it down real quick, but I really think that in Egypt and Kemet, the hieroglyphics, the boats, or the arcs, I have a whole concept with that. And that's why I made my ceramic piece with the arc. And that's a whole thing within itself. Just keep holding that in your mind. And then also you hear about Abraham Hicks where she's talking about flowing down the river of consciousness. I really think that we're all moving through life in these boats and our body is the boat. I feel as if we're just all flowing through these different frequencies. And even air is a liquid. But when you talk to someone and let's say you're in a great mood and then you talk to someone and they're complaining, or I'm not talking like they're going through some shit and you got to help your homie out. That's fine. But I'm talking about somebody who's just very negative or always talking about something that's wrong or always blaming people or always victimizing themselves, always da 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 da, blah, blah, blah. I feel as if you are jumping down in their boat or you're allowing them to get into your boat. And that's when things get messy. And I feel like people like to jump in other people's boats. They don't really want to do the work. And maybe that's a horrible example, but I feel as if you talk to somebody on the phone and you hear the frequency of their voices, you're having that energy exchange. And it's kind of like you're allowing that person to jump into your boat or you're jumping into their shitty ass boat that's drowning. you know, that's how I think of it. But just being impeccable with your words, minding what you're saying and what even you're listening to. I think that is really important. Now let's talk about protection. One of my favorite forms of protection when you're dealing with con artists, with thieves, with tricksters is confusion. That's my favorite form of protection is to confuse the fuck out of them. Um, and you can do this by working with trickster gods. All mercurial gods are gods that usually open roads. Tahuti, Elegua, Eshu, they're trickster gods. They're mercurial gods. And so you can work with them if you feel as if someone is crossing your boundaries, if somebody is being invasive, con artists, gossipers, people who are running smear campaigns. One of my favorite things to do with people who are running smear campaigns is just to let them go crazy. I've dealt with very unstable, unhinged individuals who have created all types of very strange fairy tales about me. And I'll just let it rock and just let it go. And then after a while, the stories are just so unhinged that something should have happened already, but nothing happened. So they wind up looking like Blake Lively, just lying. And they die on their own swords. And then the other thing with confusion, which is a great herb that I like to work with, is poppy seed. Poppy seed confuses and cloaks as well. Cloves, when you're dealing with gossip in the workplace, especially, you can turn gossip and slander into money, into opportunities. And if you're dealing with someone who you've given your power away, I love bay leaves for taking your power back. Bay leaves are also great for protection and cleansing and money and prosperity. For your throat chakra, dandelion is great for speaking your truth, generosity in the voice. And if you're withholding your truth and your voice using dandelion root, and how I like to do these work with these herbs, you can put them in candles. I'll make a tea out of it and I'll put it in my bath, or you could put it in your floor wash, or you could put it in your head wash. Head washes are amazing. Lots of people in Caribbean, African, Hoodoo use head washes. They're great if you have any Aries placements too, or if your children have Aries placements, or if you just have any brain fog or confusion for your own self, you can use head washes and you boil herbs, or you just put herbs in a jar overnight. You can put it outside with the moon. You can put it outside with the sun, depending on like what you want. Do you want clarity? Do you want intuition? Intuition, the moon, clarity, the sun. But head washes are great. I think everybody should do a head wash at least once every 3 months. But if you have a lot of brain fog, or if you have the Aries placements, it's great for them as well. And yeah, so you can use those for that. Now let's talk about Segmet. Segmet is one of the greatest healers, and that is because she is Kundalini and she is an alchemist. And when I say Kundalini, Kundalini does mean the snake going up your spine, but I feel like the best way that I've heard it explained is that pop that you just heard, that slap, that's Kundalini. When you hear a fire truck go by, that's Kundalini. That surprise, that is Kundalini energy. And Sekhmet is excellent for protecting mothers and children. And the one thing that I will say about her is that if you don't know how to control your anger, if you don't know how to sit with yourself and sit with fire, and you haven't mastered the lower three chakras and your reptilian brain, and you just fly off the handle, I would maybe hold off with working with her, because she is rage. She's anger. She's Kundalini. She's all of that. And all of that is beautiful and it's important, but you need to know how to work with that. And it's important, I think, whenever you're working with gods and goddesses, to know their shadow parts and their positive parts as well. And then we have Anubis. Anubis, oh, I love Anubis. He's so great. So Anubis is an excellent protector for melanated people. Anubis can travel through all dimensions, space and time. If someone has stolen from you, whether it's joy, money, belongings, time, he can retrieve it back for you. He is good for if you've ever been literally spiritually attacked by a person, a practitioner, a priest, a priestess, a witch, whatever, someone praying up against you, doing weird shit. I'm talking about heavy, heavy magic, like when people are sending lower vibrational entities or working with the Solomon keys, stuff like that. He is excellent, excellent. And even if you're dealing with that old down south, like white supremacy, weird, violent energy as well. Anubis is excellent for dealing with stuff like that. He runs people down the tunnels of Set, which is essentially your subconscious and your bloodline's subconscious, and forces you or that person that he's defending you from, it forces that person to deal with their shadow side of things and their family bloodline's shadow. And you will come face to face, not only your shadow stuff, your family shadow stuff, but it's important if you do work with Anubis that you do your own shadow work, because that does come up. Anything you send out, you have to be able to take. So you have to be okay with seeing your own shadow and working through your own shadow. And you really are aware. And I'd like to say too, that anything that I'm saying, this is for protection, and just in the sense of hoodoo is protection that our ancestors made up to protect us, because the judicial system wasn't working for us, because people were tired of their children being harmed, their brothers being harmed, their families being harmed, things being taken from them, not having any money, all of these injustices. It's the same thing. This is for protection. This is not because somebody bumped into you, or you want what somebody has, or anything like this. This is for protection, and also to master yourself and to bring in things for yourself. That's what magic is for. It's not to like anybody who's trying to sadistically hurt someone because they just don't like that person or they think they shouldn't have something, they're weak. They're a weak magician. They're a weak priestess. They're a clearance rack, high priestess, warlock, shaman. It's weak. It's very weak. And one day those people meet their match, so you don't know who is who. And like I've said before, it's just like we live in a society where if you want it, you can have it, you can buy it. But when we're talking about spiritual gifts, there is spiritual ranking. And some people are very powerful. They come from very powerful bloodlines. They come from sibyls. They come from priests. They come from high priestesses. And that's a whole other thing that we'll get into at another time that has to deal with the art, actually. But, it's just important to just everybody stay in their lane, especially now. Especially now, Pluto in Aquarius is not playing. Pluto in Aquarius, it's Saturn. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. Saturn is going to bring you rewards or get you back. Saturn, it doesn't matter what you think or what you say or how quick, slick you're trying to talk your way out of it. It doesn't matter. It's important that we just have integrity at this point because it's gone are the days where you can just hurt Black women, hurt Black men, hurt Black people, and just skip into the sunset with your family and your bloodline and it's all good. That shit is gone. It's not happening like that anymore. So it's important that all of the things, especially the things that I'm saying, and I've protected it. The things that I'm saying, it cannot be used to hurt anybody. It's used to protect yourself. It's used to protect your family, and it's used to better yourself and to empower you. Because that's what all this stuff is about. We're empowering ourselves, which then ripples to our children, which then ripples to our community and ripples into the world. And that is where the beautiful change, the change that is permanent can take place. And then lastly, if you want to strengthen your throat chakra, wearing the throat chakra color, which is blue, is supportive. Eating fruit that's blue, also working with blue candles is amazing. On a Wednesday is ruled by Mercury. And of course you can do it any other days, but it just gives it more power if you do it on Wednesdays. And yes, and I believe that's it. So thank you so much. I hope that this is supportive for everybody. And I will see you next week. We will be discussing Saturn in retrograde. And also we'll be still climbing up the tree of life, the Kabbalah. Take care. Bye.